Welcome back to Lambda Bible Studies, and welcome back, Philip Vortman. Is that how you pronounce your surname?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. That's perfect.
Great. I think I ask you that every time.
Yeah, it's getting better.
Is it? I'm not sure it is. Yes, I'm sorry for the late start to this stream. I've just got back from. I was playing funk music, and the rehearsal ran long, and hence also my exciting attire. And this is a conversation that we've been planning and talking about doing this stream for months, years at this point. It's much awaited conversation, and we're talking about the internet, which is something that I think we all have experience with. I think I can more or less guarantee anybody listening to our voices right now interfaces with this strange new thing, although nothing is new under the sun. So perhaps that will come into our conversation. How are you doing? And do you have anything you want to announce or plug or shout out before we get going here?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again, Luke. And you're looking good.
Pleasure.
In your suit.
Thank you.
I think I just well, yeah, I mean you always look good, but it's so particular.
Well, I guess that's the point of suits. This is my my best formal clothes that I would wear to an event like a wedding or whatnot. And we were filming the band because we want to play weddings and such. So I guess if this jacket doesn't make me look good, then nothing will.
Yeah, well, I'd plug wearing a suit if it makes a person look as good as you.
Thank you. Oh, you're too kind, and I'm glad to also be re-bearded. Having come out of the summer, I've kind of regained a little masculinity, but because my beard is quite fresh to my face, it's not looking as magnificent as yours, which has formed an excellent and rugged. Christine says, "Sleep well."
Yeah. Ready for work in the morning.
Yeah, this is you've got to dress down in the evening, and this is what I relax in.
Nice.
Great, and you've also prepared us a slideshow, which puts you in the A-star category for guests.
Oh wow, thanks. Yeah, that's very kind of you to say. Yeah, so the topic is, what is the internet? I've left it undefined as what is internet, just in case there isn't just one.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and we're going to look at this from a variety of interesting and hopefully new angles that people may not have considered this question. People might think, oh, I already know the answer to this. It's an obvious question, but I'm hoping that people will leave this stream with new questions and thoughts and ideas that they hadn't had before, and maybe will have some practical significance even.
I mean, this is your field, isn't it? So I'd be very curious to hear off the bat, like when you hear the question, what is the internet?
It's a series of tubes, isn't it?
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, so I guess the thing that makes the internet so named, and the thing that makes it unique, is that it is a communications system that spans the globe. There is, like, humanity has settled on one big highway system for passing data and information around. And it turns out that communication is central to much of human society. And what we've ended up doing is kind of replicating in interestingly different ways a lot of the things that we already did as humans, and the changes that happen to those activities when they're done over this kind of computerized network can sometimes be good, but very often can be very bad, I would argue. So it's kind of the driving force for like modifying the way that humans do so much of the things that constitute our lives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was considering putting Deuteronomy 30 in here somewhere, but instead of that, I've put a different. Deuteronomy 30 is where Moses gives Israel the option of choosing life or death.
Wow.
Which seems like a kind of binary option, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And binary is pretty important, as I understand it. I mean, like I said, this isn't my field. You'll have to.
Well, it is my field, and I can tell you, in computer terms, everything's binary.
Perfect.
Maybe there are some binaries that have been attempted to be broken down, and we'd want to push against that.
Okay. Not going to mention anything specific. It's not like
is there actually an internet? Says Corax. Oh, an internet too, maybe.
Internet the second.
Oh, Johnny made the same joke as me. It's a series of tubes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that was a reference to to Johnny, but clearly I'm missing something. So, well, because it's binary, there we go. Right on topic, Nathan. I thought I'd put this quote from the Sermon on the Mount right at the beginning of the stream, because it's good to have Jesus accompanying you through through the topic that you're talking about. And he's also got a binary logical premise, I guess one could say. And he says, but let your communication be yay, yay, which is yes, or nay, nay, which is not from that pop song, but it's not.
Yeah, this is not the opposite of the, what was it, the twist? No, what was it? Anyway, there's a dance. Dip? No, don't remember.
Watch me. Yeah, I can't remember what.
Whip.
Whip. There we go. That's what it is. Yeah. Well, the whip comes if you say more than yay or nay.
That song is deeper than I'd given it credit for.
Yes. I think it's deeper than what the writers gave it credit for. But probably not. Anyway. So, and then he also says, for whatever is more than these cometh of evil. So outside the framework of yes and no, of the binary light and dark, as it were, the one and the zero, whatever is trying to be more or less than that is of evil.
So you're saying anything outside of the internet is evil? This is not the message I thought you would be.
Yes, I'm actually a Gnostic. Nobody knew this, but today's my outing. So you mentioned one thing that maybe can get us started off in the conversation, which was that language or communication is fundamental to what the internet is. And for me, a biblical concept that runs kind of parallel to this, but also just something that underlies what the internet is trying to be, is the word or language. So I've broken it down here into creativity, structures, and purpose for the time being. I don't know if that actually does justice to the word as a concept, but I'm trying to work in sets of three here for the for the sake of a kind of Trinitarian symmetry. So
a cord of three strands is not easily broken.
Exactly. But that's also how I understand the internet. And you said there's nothing new under the sun. I also think there's something about the internet that kind of reflects the way in which language works. And that's something I heard on the Dark Horse podcast recently as well, which was that the internet is fundamentally a postmodern reality because it's ultimately linguistic in nature. So the kind of reality which it is defined purely by what you say and not about like physical resistance.
Yeah, everything is formed of language. And I guess language there meaning human language, because there's an interesting sense in which the real universe is arguably comprised of like it comes about through God's language. You know, let there be light, let there be, an expanse, etc. Whereas us as humans, we have that same declarative power within the construct that we create.
Yeah,
I mean, I especially know this because more than being a programmer, I've often made video games. I used to do that professionally, and there you really do have the ability to just speak things into existence. You type in the human-made computer language, and literally anything you could imagine exists.
Yeah, so I mean, there we've got creativity and structures already, and then the purpose is obviously the thing that you're aiming to generate through the language that you're using. And yeah, I find it interesting. I've been thinking a lot about the Apostles' Creed recently, which confesses God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Father is the creator of heaven and earth. So there's the creativity, and the Son is the one through whom the law is fulfilled. So the salvation of the world comes through him. And there you have like the structures, and they meet their goal. So the purpose is also fulfilled. But there is a kind of moving beyond the purpose to a new purpose, or to the end of time, in which the Holy Spirit does his work by creating the church and so on. So we've got, from a Christian perspective, reality also being shaped like this. But then obviously, as we try to create things within the world as human beings, that's going to reflect itself as well in what we do. I'm just going to pop over to a bit more of a historical orientation that we can maybe use to talk about the internet a bit more. And here I've got a triad of players that are important when it came to the development of the internet, and also, yeah, I guess players that are always important when it comes to the development of technology. And I think language, like a lot of other things, is just a technology. It has its own mechanics, and it can move people to do things and so on. And so you've got different kinds of languages that play a role in different parts of life. So yeah, I don't know. I broke it down into the academy because the exchange of ideas for the sake of intellectual growth and so on played an important role in the development of the internet, just to, like, using a Palantir in The Lord of the Rings or something. Being able to transmit information over long distances was obviously of interest to intellectuals. But then the military also needs this. Information is a really important resource when it comes to warfare, as well, as we probably know more in our time than in any other time, although spies from like the Second World War and so on has also interested me recently. And there it definitely plays like, you can't overestimate the value that information has when it comes to enemy movements and so on. And yeah, I guess also a reference to history and so on, to give you ideas of how you can counteract your enemies. And then there's also commerce, which is maybe one of the strongest players when it comes to the development of the internet as we know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a useful idea to throw in at this point as well, whilst we're defining terms, is the difference between the internet and the web, where the internet predates the web quite a lot. I always remember that the web came around about the same time I was born, so it's easy for me to remember the early 90s.
Okay.
So
were you produced by the web? No.
well, it's just a strange thing to think that, yeah, I have never known the earth without the web being a thing. not that I was using it for the whole time, but yeah, it's like quite quite a strange marker of like so much of the world operates on the web, and its year zero was also was also my year zero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yes,
Well, the web.
the ARPANET was a military endeavor, which I think was the kind of the very founding thing that happened that led to the internet. So, in a sense, the military was the first of those three that was involved, and then the academy. I think they were communicating between campuses in America. But I'd argue that those two have been eclipsed ever since by the commerce, which is, the public use of the internet is, I think, ended up being much more significant than the military or academic use of it.
Yeah, and I wonder to what degree we actually understand what's going on with the internet in its commercial state, or how would you call it, like capitalist state or something like that. The fact that it's been opened up to the free market has really turned it into like an unleashed beast in some ways, I sometimes think, a leviathan. So that is really interesting.
In China, of course, they have the Great Firewall of China, that is an attempt at the borders of the country to block significant amounts of the rest of the web. But it's actually relatively easy for people inside China to subvert this firewall. And I think it's generally considered that that's deliberate so that businesses are able to work around it, because China knows that it would be devastating economically to actually block off their businesses from like free access to the rest of the world. So as with so much of the rest of this story, it's a tale of kind of almost materialistic greed, or a drive for more power and more stuff, regardless of the consequences.
Yeah, like the spreading of your influence, of your own influence. At least that also, when it comes to the image of the spider and the web, I find quite interesting. Oh yes, immediacy. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, Nathan says the idea of immediacy is interesting. Machines or tools like the internet reduce the effort and reduce how long it takes to bring an idea to fruition. And then he's also kind of linked it to two other interesting ideas here: magic and slavery. Both of which you can see how they have negative connotations, and but are kind of appealing because of what you can do with them. It's like this alluring, forbidden power.
Although, yeah, if Nathan is saying it, I'm not sure if magic is necessarily meant negatively.
Oh, interesting.
It's like great power, like potential, but at the same time, you're enslaved to the
well, whilst you mention it, I think slavery, and much of the historical context that it operated was functionally indistinguishable from employment, and nobody has a problem with the concept of employing somebody. So, we can probably have that conversation another day. But
well, I even think
certainly there is misuse of magic and misuse of slavery, which is very bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think human nature is to be enslaved. So even if you're like a tyrant king or something, that tyrant king is enslaved to the things that he cannot, that he's obsessed with, or that make him paranoid, or whatever kind of state of mind he finds himself in. The thing that he orients himself according to is that to which he has ultimately been enslaved.
It's a very Peterson phrasing there.
Yeah, sorry, that shows my influences maybe.
Do you draw links between creativity and the academy, or is there not a mapping between these two triads?
Yeah, so historically, I mean, I originally had the military above the academy because of the historical or the chronological progression of how the internet developed. But then I, again, because of the creed, I thought I'd put creativity at the top and then structures second, because there is something about the academy being the mind and the military being kind of the mechanics or the engines that bring the academy into, that enforce it in a sense, or that create the structures and the boundaries within which it can flourish without just like seeping into every corner, like running away, without having any container to give it shape and structure.
Well, here's an interesting thought. Suppose you sorted it military, academy, commerce, and then you therefore sorted the other list structure, creativity, purpose. Could you argue that the sequence of creation of the world started with structure, separating the light from the darkness, etc., and then creativity, this like explosion of like different kinds of animals, different kinds of animals above in the water and the vegetation, but then it's only right at the end that you get purpose in mankind, that is imbued with the great mission to subdue the creatures and rule over them, and tend to the garden and so on.
Well, I think they always happen at the same time. There's a nice phrase from the tradition of the church, which is that the works of the Trinity are always indivisible, like when facing the outside. So when the Father does something, the Son is also doing something, and the Holy Spirit is doing something. And it's only since Jesus that we know how to discern the three spirits, because through Jesus we've been given like a gateway into the Trinity. So through him we can also speak to the Father as the Son, whereas before God was a bit more opaque from the outside, and now we've got a much clearer revelation, which will also still play a role. I think you mentioned light earlier. Let there be light, and how that discerns between things and so on, and that also plays an important role in the relationship between what I've got here as the Word and the triad, which is just like the historical expression of something that I consider to be more spiritual or abstract. But yeah, like you said in Genesis, the Father speaks, so the Word proceeds from the Father, and then the Holy Spirit is also there, bringing that which has been spoken into material expression. He's making things manifest. So they're always working at the same time, which is what makes reality so rich and so layered and so multidimensional, rather than it just being like a one-dimensional slideshow. Yeah, and I think one can see that here as well to some degree, that the fact that these three big players have influenced one another, even though you can see like it tends from one towards the other throughout history, they all, even to this day, play an important role in the continued development of how these things work and how they're implemented, I guess, and so on. But I think, yeah, I'm going to pop on over. I don't have too much more in terms of talking points than these 3 points. Now I've got the third point, but I think it creates a nice basis for just further discussion, which is the light. And I've divided that into patterns, manifestation, and movement. And so all 3 of these points, I've connected them to one another like this. They relate to one another in this kind of triadic or triune way, I hope. And so I've divided it into a spiritual reality that precedes the fleshly or the carnal, the earthly reality.
These slides are so cool, by the way.
Thanks. worked all afternoon on them.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like a whole visual, like a Hollywood level visual language has been created just for this stream.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, maybe we can get into what we're seeing in the pictures as well, because there's been a lot of like dark hallways, tall pillars, lighting, shadows, and then people walking around.
Yeah, yeah. So what we, I guess, this doesn't make the internet feel, friendly and simple and straightforward and obvious. It makes it feel somewhat mysterious and hostile, I would say. And is that how you feel about the internet?
Well, I think just like anything in the reality in which we live, in the world in which we live, it participates in the fallen nature of things. So it is just as complex and hostile as the world in which we live. And that's like when you go out into the internet and you play CSGO or something, you get called all kinds of things for not being
Yeah.
able to respond appropriately to the shouts or whatever, the calls. I forgot, I haven't played that in ages, so I don't know if this is an appropriate example. Or you go into any kind of forum, and you get into all kinds of fights and so on. There is a kind of hostility, or even the things that you can be exposed to in terms of visual content and audio content and who knows what other kind of content, can really attack you in the same way that the things that you encounter in the world. The only thing is that on the internet, it's reduced in a much more extreme way to spiritual assault, which is what makes it. Well, yeah, I guess that's the characteristic quality of the internet if one compares it to true reality, which has also prompted me on occasion to refer to it as like an underworld or a shadow realm or something like that, because everything that exists in it is representational, as though you're looking into a mirror. It's never a thing unto itself in the same way that a physical object seems to be, as in you can't interact with it physically if you're seeing it on the screen, even though you can see it. And I think that plays an important role when it comes to manifestation. That's why I termed the revelation segment here light, because what you see is kind of what you consider to be manifest, I think, in a lot of ways, and light plays an important role in this, even just in bringing about things. Like if one thinks about sunlight, and how that generates the potential for all life on Earth in a lot of ways, from a physics perspective. Light is the kind of thing that brings things into manifest being, and on a screen, through the processes that and the different media types that we can channel when communicating via the internet. Light is also used to generate kind of like sub-realities, philosophical, metaphysical sub-realities, fictions in which you can explore your thoughts in ways that maybe weren't possible before. Yeah, and that's why I've also categorized it here as revelation. So the spirit, always the word, this kind of world of forms in a sense, manifests itself by coming to light, and it does that in a sense so that the flesh or the kind of, I don't know, physical material creatures can also come into contact with it and be drawn into it in a sense.
So let's seat this conceptual framework that you've laid out back towards the let's bring it back around to the internet again. So how
Yes.
how do you see spirit, revelation, and flesh relating to the internet?
Well, it's kind of like entropy, I think,
Ooh.
which which I've been trying to
That's
sharpen my
exciting.
knowledge on. Yeah, I don't know if it's worked, but I guess the experts will let me know.
Fun
Um,
fact, by the way, the guy who named entropy picked that word because it sounded like the word energy. He was like, well,
okay,
entropy is a bit like energy, so I'll pick two. I'll pick a new word that you know
sounds kind of like.
that sounds kind of like energy, but it's not energy. So that, if anything, is just confusing.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. I think it comes out of the industrial era, like the 1830s, and it's really, yeah, it's an interesting concept from that perspective, because it's seated in this world of like machinery of steel and fire and so on,
Hmm.
and mechanical movements, which is a big contrast to the very virtual world of the internet. But you see the language of entropy being taken up in like quantum physics as well, in a way that I think is unique, or still one can differentiate between the way it's used there and the way it was used originally in like the industrial era. And then you see it again taken up in the internet, or in information theory, which also lies at the heart of the internet. And what entropy allows for in a lot of ways is the unraveling of the potential that lies at the heart of something. Or the like, if there's infinite potential, then entropy leads to the fact that it becomes something concrete that no longer has so much potential. So the potential turns into the actual, in a sense.
Corax is lobbying for us to use the word chaos instead of entropy.
Entropy.
Although there's a sense in which the so I came across entropy exactly as you described from an information theory perspective first, like with my degree. So I've always thought of it in that direction, that if you, for example, have a very complex, like swirling void of eddies, and if you've got a lot of complex structure, and you think, how what's the minimum amount of characters that I would need if I was going to fully losslessly describe every twist and turn in this void of fluid, then that's a high complexity, and therefore a system with a lot of entropy. And once the system becomes describable in fewer characters, then it is then a low entropy system. So that's
Hmm.
the that's the direction that I intuitively think of it from. So you can see how that has applications, if you, from a technical perspective, to networking. Because if you're sending a message across the internet, then if you can, if for example, if you're sending a single character, if you just press and hold a key on your keyboard lots of times, that's actually quite a simple message. And instead of sending that letter 7,000 times, you could kind of imagine saying it's this letter, and then it's 7,000 times. You just have the number 7,000, right? And you've fully described. Whereas if your message is, if your message has a lot of words and the words carry meaning, you're never going to be able to compress it as much. So there's a sense in which the entropy describes the raw amount of content in what's happening.
Yeah, I think the classical way of defining it is that it's a resolution of noise, which is exactly what you described in a very nice kind of Genesis 1 way, that you've got the ocean with all its eddies and so on, like the noise.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, noise also, if you try to show noise geometrically, then it looks like an ocean. So you've got the noise, and then as soon as you try to find resolution for it, it's like you're trying to. It becomes less and less chaotic. So you've got the chaos in the beginning, but then, like you were saying, energy lies at the heart of entropy. I think, like from the Greek, it means something like energy, and then trope is change. So it's like energy change.
But
So you've got the potential in the beginning, and it changes into something that's less wibbly, as Ashenduke defines. Yes.
yeah. But of course, there are thermodynamic laws that describe how the entropy of a system behaves, over time, right? Which is to say, if you have a system, it requires energy to create order, which makes entropy sort of the opposite of energy in a way, right? That you need to inject energy. You think of it like if you start with a high entropy system and you want to make it ordered, you have to do a lot of active work. You have to intervene a bunch, and that's going to produce an end state which is very unstable. And in fact, that instability can be harnessed, and you can take an ordered system and break it down, and in the process release energy. And so the arrow of time, in some ways, is a sign of the original order that God put into the universe. You say it's not a surprise to see entropy increasing. What's a surprise is that the universe began in such a low entropy state. And that's like a sign of God's great order in creation. And I've even sometimes wondered if you could see the that thermodynamic effect as almost like a mathematical description of the effects of sin. Like it's the fact that the universe is falling apart over time. It's moving away from God's orderedness, and so therefore, but it's difficult because it's very deeply mathematically inevitable. Like you can make the simpler system. You could start with, for example, 50 zeros followed by 50 ones, and then your rule every turn to update the state of the universe is just pick two digits and swap them. And you can see how, mathematically, over the course of 10 steps, you're likely to have a more disordered system than you began with. Now, it's possible that it could reorder itself, but it's just so unlikely. And that's kind of the intuition for why entropy increases, because the series of zeros followed by the series of ones is very compressible. So it's a low entropy state. But just by following simple rules, the tendency is that it becomes uncompressible over time and ultimately settles to its maximum entropy. The probability tells you that it will become the most disordered that it possibly can, which is a bit like what we see, what we observe in as in the universe as a consequence of sin, right?
Yeah, and I think dead, even maybe like disordered in the sense that it's like completely dismembered and no longer like unified in a living and moving. I mentioned movement here in the Revelation segment as that which is also a part of commerce. Or if you've got like a healthy body, you've got circulation on the level of the neurons. Mm-hmm. So the central nervous system has kind of a circulation of information, and you've got the blood pumping through the body. So there is a contained kind of homeostasis, which is ideal if the body finds itself in this state of like balance.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but there is still movement and like containment. There are patterns that repeat themselves, and there is a clear manifestation of this being,
Hmm.
the body of the person that we are speaking about, wearing a
Yeah.
very fine suit. Uh, no.
And the fact that life produces order and symmetry and things is thermodynamically driven by the sun. It's an injection of
Mm.
energy is required. So you could actually see energy linked to order, I think. God is the source of energy and life, and also the origin of order. And it's kind of, you're almost saying the same thing there, that we as we as we live and breathe, all we're doing is spending the order that we were given in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's something behind that, which is the reason for the worship of the sun as being quite a prominent and effective religious attitude in the ancient world, even though I disagree with it completely. I think it is
Yeah.
foolishness as a Christian who has been enlightened by the true light, not just the
Yes.
sunlight. But
Yeah.
but it's what I find
Yes.
interesting is that Pythagoras, who's also like a big mathematician before the Lord, even though it probably didn't help him much, but he studied in Egypt apparently and in Babylon before, so maybe he encountered Daniel. I think they were even
Interesting.
contemporaries.
Huh.
Yeah, um,
Huh.
and and he then ended up, uh, I think, centering his cult, which was also a geometrical and mystical cult. So it was like geometry, but religion, the religion of geometry. Um, which is, I mean, one can maybe see similar things in Islam, where they also have like a very nice use of geometry because they can't draw pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so one tries to capture the divine in geometry and perfect form and beauty and symmetry and so on. And he also, Pythagoras, I think he also centered his cult around Apollo, who is the god of the sun in the Greek pantheon. So there one also kind of sees there's like the origin is the light of the world, um,
Mm.
who then in Christianity is Jesus Christ, who is the word as well in the beginning. Let there be light. So
Mm.
there's like a true light. And then later, that's also funny because kind of Genesis 1 relativizes the whole sun worship, which one might have encountered in Egypt, for example, in the god Re,
Hmm.
um, where in Genesis the light is created first, and then later on, like the fourth day, God is like, yeah, okay, and I'll kind of make a lamp called the sun and another one called the moon, and the true light kind of comes before um, the the lamps that God then makes. It's
Hmm.
pre-existent, one might say.
That has always seemed intriguing to me because did like did the light kind of imply that it originated with something that hadn't yet been created, or did the sun cast additional light? And what happened therefore to the light that was before? You have to either one way or the other, right? Either the light, if you looked, suppose there existed people on day two, and they looked towards where the sun was going to be created in the future, would the light imply the sun? I mean, I guess you could argue that I'm asking stupid questions about the story. I'm asking questions that imply the story is meant to be understood in a certain way that is kind of naive, maybe. But if
Well,
it does feel like fruitful in a way to throw out the questions that occur to me, even if I'm not sure they're well formed.
Yeah, well, I think it's a pretty cool question because if you've got the light in the beginning and there's like raw light, and then as the days progress of creation leading up to the seventh day, the Sabbath day, in which all things have kind of reached their equilibrium, the state of rest, the Sabbath, which you had with Black Horse.
Yeah.
the It's almost also like entropy in the sense of the change of energy from one state into the next, where you've got like the light in the beginning, you've got the word of God, and he is then, as creation progresses through day and night cycles, further developing and making actual what beforehand was potential. So where before you just had like the raw water, he draws out of it dry land, and then you've got a binary division again between the dry land and the water, and he defines between heaven and earth, so another binary kind of division between what is above and what is below, and so on.
I feel like we never quite brought this plane down to land, in that I was asking what's the connection between Spirit, Revelation, Flesh, and the internet, and you said,
yes, sorry,
I think it's like entropy. And then we talked about entropy for like 15 minutes.
Great. Yeah.
Let's get back on where you were going with that.
And now getting to the internet finally. So there was a bit of turbulence on the way.
Yeah.
The noise is busy being
Hopefully
resolved,
people trust the pilot and the co-pilot here.
Yeah, exactly. It's necessary, I think, to lay some groundwork and to maybe frame the conversation a bit, speaking more generally about entropy, because what the internet is born in a context. It's not like the internet just has always existed and now it's revealed itself to us like the Necronomicon or something, and now we can access it. But it develops out of human development in general, and it's a part of the development of human history towards a specific end. And I think what is interesting to me, and that's why again I brought in the light, is that the internet is a kind of, again, it's able to manifest things. You're able to access a reality that is like a mirror. You're not actually interacting with the physical world. You're not actually speaking to one another, if you're speaking to a person via the internet, in the same way that you would be if the person were in the room. Like, you cannot pick up on certain scents and pheromones and whatever else. You're engaging with a reality of lights and shadows that can be deceptive as well. And so there's something there that is a part, I think, of the development of the human being, where the internet plays a significant role. Like, there's all of reality, and the human being engages with it and develops cultures, high cultures, even civilization, and it leads to the point at which the human being can generate fictions that are so convincing that you spend most of your time within these fictions. And to me, one of the important questions is, because I think the internet is a powerful tool, and you can use it for good as well if it is subordinated to good. Like with all fallen creations, we intended it for evil, as Joseph says, but God intends it for good. So this medium, because I think it is a medium, it is a light in that sense. It transfers energy from a source to the receiver. It's encoded stuff. The things that are encoded can be good, and then when they're decoded, they can be like nourishment to the one receiving it. And that's one big question for me, is like, what does one see reflected in the internet? Is it something that is serving something that is greater than the internet, or is the internet to large degrees, like the fallen world in which we live, a kind of cesspool, a stagnant pond in which the internet is just existing for its own sake, and people are being sucked into it without being led somewhere that is better through it? Yes. So I think there are these there's that kind of a binary reality at the heart of the internet as well. That it can be good, but it can also, and is probably predominantly corrupt and corrupting in its influence.
I wonder if it's like an airport in that it can be a piece of the puzzle. You can use the internet to go places, but you shouldn't go to live there. It feels like there's a lot of people who've ended up inhabiting the internet. Like they've become denizens of like a what ought to be a temporary space that you pass through. I don't know. I imagine like you go to the duty free and you're just like browsing the cheap perfume for the rest of your life instead of forgetting about the holiday that you were meant to be going on.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually such a brilliant image. I need to write that. Well, I guess it's recorded now, so I can just rewatch this. But I think that's pretty cool, because I was also trying to think of an analogy. Like, do you spend all your time writing and receiving post, like physical letters, or do you also do other things, or do the letters, do they fulfill some kind of a function that is greater than just the process of post? To reduce the internet back down to its original form, the email.
Yeah.
I think, at least.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the message that's encoded could be genuinely nourishing, and I think it's easy for us to get swept up in, especially with the slightly, trad reactionary crowd that are probably watching, that it's easy to get swept up in, the new equals bad, and let's find all the criticisms we can of the internet. But let's not forget that even this very YouTube channel that we're talking on, or that you guys are watching right now, has been a means for grace. God has graciously and amazingly used this channel. I've had lots of people tell me that because of watching these live streams, and my guests, that I'm very grateful, have come and helped me put on, that it's like led them to start attending church again, or actually started them down the road of exploration, and people have got baptized as a result of. So my point is, let's not forget that God can work incredibly and amazingly through any medium, and good can be done, even with a technology that I'm sure we can all immediately think of how dangerous and corrupted the internet is, and YouTube is, and all these technologies that we're using, and yet, like Noah and his family, in the midst of his generation, there are these little pockets of faithfulness and of good that kind of thrive in spite of the circumstances.
Yeah, I think so as well. And yeah, I mean, I think, again, talking about entropy, but it's just time, the progress of time, the slow march of time. And I'm not a progressivist. If anything, then I'm a, what do you call that again? If you believe in, like,
Reactionary?
decadence, or, yeah, probably.
I'd say it's the opposite of progressive.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a better word.
I mean, I think there are constants, obviously, like there's something constant about human nature, and there's because God is sustaining and maintaining things. But at the same time, I think there is the great regression into the end, where things will have gotten so bad, like in the times of Noah, where there is no redemption to be found anymore for that which exists, and then God will bring about his judgment to put an end to that which is evil, to make one final binary cut. And and make all things a yes
All right.
instead of a no.
Yeah.
Although, or maybe to eternalize the yes and no in some sense. There's something, a formulation that I once proposed, which might be heretical. So I don't know if it is so good. But the thing is, in the even in like what the binary cornerstone in a lot of ways embodies, as I understand it, is that you've got a yes, which is like a positive existence. It is the potential again, which can be confirmed and as a result expressed or brought into expression. So if you put like a one, then something will happen. The one will happen. Whereas the zero, the no, is just like a rejection of something that is potentially still there. And as long as you put a zero, the thing will not happen. But as soon as the one is there, then the thing happens. And so the zero isn't actually, it isn't a thing. It's a negative value. And because of that, and I understand Satan like that as well in a lot of ways. He's just a corrupting force. When the final judgment has been spoken, and the fires of hell will eternally consume the devil and his servants, there's like an eternalization of the negative, which glorifies the positive in a sense, because it defines the positive as being true. um, and I think that is why when one engages with the internet and employs it to serve a purpose, to me, it's always important to make sure that the purpose that it's serving is one that is greater than the internet. Like if it's communication for the sake of organizing a meetup with your family, then that's a great function that you're using the internet for. Or if you're doing it to explore the thoughts, like I've been playing video games a bit more recently again, trying to see what I can gain out of it. And to some degree, I've got the impression that they can be, depending on what you're doing, like which game you're playing, but they can be like the classics of our time.
Huh.
It's a kind of literature that you can engage with. And so
Yeah.
just like it's not necessarily evil if you read Dracula, even though it's been robbing me of sleep a bit in recent times. Um, and it's actually quite a Christian novel, I think. It's my impression so far anyway. You can read it even though it's not explicitly like the Bible or something, and you can gain a lot out of it in terms of wisdom. And I think there's something similar in the way we employ these very contemporary forms or modern forms of technology in our interaction with the world.
Well, wise man avoids all extremes, and I guess it's easy to observe an extreme and therefore condemn the entire activity. And actually, the problem was not the activity; it was the extreme manner in which it was being undertaken. So, in the same way, I'd agree. I still think that there is great potential artistic merit in a video game. I think it could be. I mean, as a broader point, I think we should be encouraging exciting and fresh expressions of creativity. For as much as we've seen change and innovation moving in a negative direction, nonetheless, I think creation is one of those things with which we image God. And so actually I would kind of anticipate that in the new creation, that there will be all kinds of technologies and engineering that mankind does, and that we should actually embrace the good that we can do through harnessing like our intellect and our intelligence, and the internet is, you know, in the hypothetical reality where Adam didn't sin, imagine the world where the flourishing of mankind, you know, the filling of the earth and the subduing it was left to happen unhampered and unerringly. I sort of think we would expect the development of all kinds of amazing communications technologies, and that in their proper place, they can be simply an improvement to one's life, much like wine gladdens a man's heart. That's what we're told in the Psalms. I think. Yeah, either way.
I think it comes up a couple of times.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. So, so yeah. So we see that wine is a good creation of God's that can we can rejoice in and enjoy. However, we're also warned lots of times about the dangers of drunkenness, and for some people the risk may be too great to indulge at all. I think it's the same way with the internet, that used correctly, I mean, we can keep in touch with people and keep one another in our prayers, and you know, look up vast libraries worth of Bible resources, and we can we can broadcast a Bible study for people to listen to while they're doing the dishes. We can do all these like awesome things that I think are good and godly things that the unfallen man would do, and I think in the new creation we will do similar things. So I guess that's the brighter side.
Yeah, I that's something that I've been wondering about as well. There's a pastor, Brian Wolfmueller, who also at some point, I mean, I don't know, I think he's also still just speculating about these things, and I wonder about it as well on occasion. Is I think he was also of the opinion that humans would have developed technology in the Garden of Eden, but I wonder if it wouldn't have been a different kind of technology. Maybe something more like the elves in the Lord of the Rings, or like in yeah, that are like, they're more integrated with nature in a sense, which sounds weird maybe, but
No.
very green. But I think it makes sense because in a way the human being is a very sophisticated technological organism. If you really, I think, take the words at like a literal level, then the human being is a very sophisticated technology, and he creates technologies that then, through the march of time, I think that there is a progress in technology. So there is like, you know, development in technology because you can inherit it. And so you've got like the telegraph or the post to begin with, and then you've got the telegraph, and then that turns into different, like more sophisticated forms of communication, the telephone, and then the internet. And yeah, so and I wonder if that, the way that we've developed our technologies isn't more related to the fall. And in Genesis 5, I think, or 4, it is also connected in a lot of ways to Cain, which is also fascinating, but it's not left unsanctified. But I just wonder if the kind of technology that we would have wouldn't be more like, you know, bioengineering. in an
And
ideal
obviously,
world.
you also see Tubal Cain, right, who develops all kinds of weapons and things. By the way, exciting times. I think
Oh,
this is my first super chat for about 6 months. So
wow. What a
thank you
man.
very much to Markkanen. Have you guys played Myst? It's a really interesting allegory to creating video games. The Denis being able to create human life in the worlds they write also seems more interesting now than ever in the age of AI. Oh, you've given us so
No.
much to bite off there. Firstly, I haven't actually played Myst, although I'm quite well aware of it. Have you played Myst?
I played the demos.
Okay.
Although, yeah, I played the demo for Myst 5 once, and I was like really, or maybe it was Myst 4. I was pretty young, and I did not get very far, but I was really like wowed by the graphics of it. And then at some point there
Yeah.
came a game called Uru Ages Beyond Mist or something, which I think was a continuation of. But I have no idea what was going on. I was a kid that was just like, wow, you can run around and stuff. So I don't know it, but AI is interesting.
Okay. Go ahead. Do you want to talk about the second half of this? So being able to the Denis being able to create human life in the worlds they write seems more interesting now than ever in the age of AI.
Well, there, like what I find interesting, again, if one thinks of the internet as a kind of mirror or a shadow realm, a world of communication of language, like the web of a spider, in which the different points of contact and their interconnectivity create an ever expanding uh, field of influence in which flies can get caught and so on. Uh, which is that's us, and then the giant spider comes and sucks the life out of us. No, but I
Ah.
think in this like kind of expanding, like it takes more and more of your life into it in a lot of ways, and the more you input into the internet as well, the more your soul in some way can be representationally manifested apart from you.
Hmm.
I mean, not that it was without you because you inputted it, but you are generating these strange sub creatures in a sense through the internet by just interacting with it, and these things being kind of recorded and stored up and then um, developed and integrated with other things and so on. So that I don't know if it is intelligence, but there is definitely something spiritual going on where powers that are greater than us are also playing their game, and they also have an end game, and that's also prophesied in the Gospels and in the Revelation and so on. So that what I think there is there is definitely a power that is steering what is happening, and I think the internet is just so dominant. It's like a world in which lies can be so much more convincing than they've ever been because you're isolated from reality if you're living an existence that's purely bound to glowing screens, the light that brings manifest lies right into your home. Um, yeah, I think there's something there that does kind of portray this dark entity that is trying to get all of humanity to fall away from the grace of God. And by now, because of the postmodern way of thinking, which is just propagated through the internet in a lot of ways, I think what's made easier, um, people people are living as though they can reject reality without any consequences. So there is a dark power that is gaining a lot of influence through our mindless obsessiveness in our interaction with the internet. And maybe there's a connection there to Myst. I don't know if the Denis is good or evil, but I think I've just associated him with the devil.
There's a concept that's kind of gained traction in the last few years of a digital double. I don't know if you've heard this term, where you you have like a simulated version of a thing, and you update it with data from the real world. So you have sensors in the object in the real world, and you have a model, perhaps a physical model, with some kind of physical simulation. Perhaps it's a model of the circuitry on the thing. Perhaps it's a model of the aggregate behavior of it over time, or the way that it wears. You could imagine all these different kinds of model, and therefore you can harness the digital double to simulate potential future states of this object. You could project it into a virtual reality situation. You could do the reverse and have people interacting with the virtual object, and then have actuators in the real world that kind of actually. So there's all this kind of activity and research going on, attempting to link more closely in all these ways the digital internet shadow realm, as you described it, with the real corporeal world which we interact with, which feels kind of like a new weird direction and speculative, but actually is not that much more than just an extension of the path that we've already been going down. I mean, we kind of draw conceptual links between, for example, if you look up train, if you you're going to travel, say you go on Google Maps and you say, I'm going to go into London, and it tells you that there's a train that's leaving in 15 minutes, and you can just about get there on time. And then suppose you're on your way there, and you keep refreshing, and then at some point it tells you, like, okay, the next train is now another half an hour away. And in your mind, you've more or less equated that the digital version of the train on your phone is the same thing. It's the same object as the real train. But therein lies the entire danger, because you're trusting that these two things, the virtual representation of the world and the actual world, are equivalent. And of course, there could be all kinds of reasons that the digital version is out of step with reality, and you end up believing more in the virtual thing than the real thing. And one of the most dangerous versions of this is that somebody might deliberately corrupt the data and want you to believe in falsehoods. And to bring it back to the AI that was mentioned, what if, and this is something that I've thought about increasingly in the last few months, if we are put back into a lockdown style situation where our entire interaction with the rest of the human race is digital, but there are filters both on what we send and what we receive, with the sophistication to fully understand. We've seen the power of these large language models, that they can, I'm not attributing them a consciousness, but they certainly have remarkably sophisticated capabilities. And I think they could easily modify incoming and outgoing traffic, to support any kind of false construct, more or less, be it audacious or quite subtle. But to the point where it would be impossible to know if you're being gaslit.
Yeah.
So the kind of this confusion between, so we first say, okay, we live in the real world. Now we say we have constructed a digital representation of the real world that we interact with, that sometimes interacts with the real world and its equivalent. And then you say, we're going to modify the digital version of reality, but you're never going to know or notice because you have begun to inhabit that digital copy, but it's a it's a grotesque, twisted, broken version of reality that has been sculpted actively by somebody to to some probably malicious end. And I just think it's worth considering that now, because the tools to potentially do this are still quite in a nascent state, but they're going to be becoming, can we trust a video? Can you trust that it is actually me who's delivering this live stream? Well, voice is getting to the point where you could fake somebody's voice pretty easily, pretty convincingly. Video is not far behind. Certainly text. Nobody's in any doubt at being able to be fooled by a fake quote. So we're kind of in potentially the unique last few moments whereby we are allowed to see one another, and we can still somewhat verify things online. But we'd better start thinking about how we're going to handle a future where we no longer have those capabilities.
I'm gonna fight to the death for those capabilities, I think.
Smart.
Yeah, oh man, there was a lot of stuff that you just had there.
Sorry.
A lot of potential packed up into your statements. No, that was really quite interesting. The one thing that I kept thinking about while you were saying these things was the Antichrist. But in the Greek, anti, not like in the Latin, anti means like against or opposed to or something. In the Greek, anti means in place of, so like a replacement. And in Genesis 3, the thing that like triggers or that brings sin into the world is the serpent that speaks the first lie. He's trying to sell the binary 0 as a 1.
Yes.
He's trying to do a deep fake to get you to believe that the person that you're speaking to is real. And if anti means in place of, and you've got the internet as like an anti-reality in a lot of ways, not necessarily in a negative sense. It's just like it's like a replacement reality that you can escape to from time to time. And I like Tolkien's approach to escapism, just because life is difficult, but obviously, anyway, that's a topic of its own. But the point is, like, if the internet is like an anti-reality, is it culminating in a kind of anti-messianic figure for this anti-reality? And would that look like an embodied anti-human? And the interesting thing is that technological advancement always seems to be an attempt to escape the curse of Adam, that one will have to toil for one's own bread. Like, you're creating tools to make your toil more bearable. And ultimately, I wonder if what one is trying to do is create, like, slaves. Create slaves that aren't human, so that you don't have which is often like the commentary that you see in movies about AI being embodied through robotics or whatever. And then they develop a consciousness of their own, and can you then, with a good conscience, still enslave these robots? Which has, based on like current AI, as I understand it, that's still very a lot of fantasy in there. It's definitely not close to a stage where it will actually be like a consciousness of its own, because consciousness is still a massive mystery.
Yeah.
But you will
I mean,
maybe have
yeah, just to jump off that briefly. If you so like from the perspective of making video games, suppose you made just a text adventure where you had a chatbot and you could like perform actions, and you could like type in to torture. You literally just typed the word torture and it would torture the person that you were talking to, and then you just had programmed it so that it would like cry in pain. There's a certain sense in which I think to participate in that simulation would be somewhat immoral. And not because I think you could see it's a complete illusion, but nonetheless, it would be an activity that would go against the interests of a human who was properly aligned. I think you know what I mean. That it's a behavior that seems somehow broken, even if you can't explain it in an you could say that there's no victim, but it's beneath the dignity of a human to take the choice to simulate an immoral action. Maybe that's the way to put it. So that's where
in terms of slavery.
Well, in terms, so I'm literally saying you are the active participant choosing to on some level cast yourself in the role of somebody doing an immoral act of like causing pain to another person for no reason.
Yes, yeah, that's what I find so like. That's also why I said earlier, the human being is a very complex or sophisticated piece of technology in a sense. Like our tools are like lesser versions of our limbs. They're like extensions of us. And then you create a tool that's literally a like a human being, because a human being is such a versatile instrument of I don't know, accomplishing things in the world. That if you do simulate it, yeah, I don't know, it's weird. It's also got the idea of procreation behind it. Like, you are procreating, you're actually trying to create human beings, but you're refusing to do it in the natural way. You're refusing to have like children and then get them to work in your household for you, because then they can grow up to be effective. Like, that's not negative if kids work in the household to do things, right? And then they become competent individuals in the world. But instead of doing that, you're going to create like a robot so that you don't have a bad conscience for making it work or something. Sorry, I might be going off on a tangent here, but I find these patterns really interesting. That like we're trying to avoid immorality, and the more we try to avoid it, the more we tend into other strange immoralities. So that you if one looks at it honestly, one is actually just seeing that we can't escape our sinful nature. We need salvation from the outside, which we've received in Christ, and in the promises that he gives us, and in our participation in him, by recognizing him as king, we participate in something that's actually good, as opposed to participating in what you were describing there. I find it very interesting.
By the way, Markinen has super chatted again. So thank you. The virtual is the hyper real. The
Ooh.
virtual is the hyper real. I don't know where the emphasis should fall here. I think it's probably on hyper. The virtual is the hyper real, implying that I think aspects of reality are heightened. It's like heightened reality.
Hmm.
That's what I would take from this suggestion. That like you take the aspects of what we observe in reality that are striking to us as humans, and we like double down on those and enhance them. So,
You
for
could, you,
example, like if you go on a walk, you're going to remember a couple of key moments, the like striking waterfall that you go past or whatever. When
hmm.
you look at somebody's, when you like go on the virtual equivalent of a walk with somebody on Instagram, and when they put up an album of photos, it's just those. You just see the waterfall. You don't see all the walking that happens in between. Maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I guess one could also say the virtual is the superficial in a sense. Like it's hyper real in the sense that it's on top of reality. It's not the actual reality, which is I don't know if that does it justice, but it's kind of like yeah, like a supermodel or something. It's like hyper real in the sense that um, that the external manifestation is such an extreme version of, like, if it's a woman supermodel. I don't know if you get male super. I don't know how it works, but like a woman supermodel, say it's like it's like an extreme form of like a hyper form of a woman, and but in the end, like you could chop her into. This is a brutal example, but you could chop her into pieces and then like throw her in a pot, and then it's like a stew, and then that's still like that exposes the hyper real for not actually being real. Like the real is real, and the hyper real is like a superficial um, reality that borrows the real to exist. Meanwhile, it's actually not hyper, or not. It's not greater, but even though it's superficial in a sense, so that's quite interesting. That
But
yeah, it's like the extreme or accentuated version.
in the sense that we image God, and this is a theme I come back to again and again. God created the universe, so it's then very natural for us to create universes ourselves.
Mm.
And the universes we create, I think, as Christians, I think we can participate in that exercise, but with the attitude that as we do so, we recognize God's creation as our inspiration and as greater than ours. And, we kind of learn a bit like, you see your dad going to work when you're a little kid, and then one day you graduate school, you get a job, and you go to work, and you kind of like discover something about your dad's life. You're like, oh, this is what it's like. He did it before me, and now I'm following in his shoes. And so when you create a universe, when we as humanity made the internet, we were only doing what was natural as the
Mm.
images of the creator. And the sin comes if we have the hubris of believing that what we've created is a superior, improved form of creation, that we've kind of exceeded God. I think this stream would be remiss if we didn't mention that meeting, virtually for a church service on Zoom or wherever is such a pale and secondary imitation of true local believers meeting to worship together, because we, people basically for a while seemed to have the opinion of, well, the problem with meeting in person is that we could end up spreading germs. And so we've actually improved on God's design, but I think we really have to push back on that and say, oh no, actually what we've created is but a pale and secondary imitation of God's universe.
Yeah, I think it's at least or at most maybe it's like it's a shadow of intended communication. Like, I think there are degrees of communication. The most intimate probably being marriage, like sleeping together in marriage.
Yeah.
And I think that like that's what God, I mean, bridal mysticism is like the ultimate way in which God describes his relationship with his church, which is why I also think the like physically being present at church, and also for me as a Lutheran, the celebration of the Eucharist is is the place where this is like most intimate, because it's like you're consuming his flesh and drinking his blood, and that is and so on. But the most like superficial, hyper real way in which one can engage in this communication of oneself with another person or to another person, and them communicating themselves to you and so on, which is also very Trinitarian, to get back to that whole idea of the creed. God speaking to his son and the Spirit's bridging the gap and so on, kind of an intercommunication between these three persons of themselves to one another. And then humanity being taken up into the conversation through their justification by Christ. It's definitely a shadow of that as well. And so again, one can communicate the gospel across the platform, the medium of the internet. And I think for that, what has been intended for evil, maybe, because human human being has the inclination towards evil. So what they do will inherently be fallen and corrupt. God has intended for good, and he does.
Yeah, I don't know that. It's not clear to me that the inception of the internet was
evil,
was directly intended for evil. Yeah, and I guess I'd want to draw that distinction, because so many other things just clearly are intended for evil. I mean, I'd actually argue Facebook, being a way for people to look lustfully at women, right? The first version of Facebook was literally was a website for the undergrads at a university to rate and rank the women on the campus. It's like it was very much, here's photos of your classmates, which one do you think is more attractive?
Okay.
So it was pretty straightforwardly unwholesome, and yet, my Christian Union at university would organize through a Facebook group, and we'd do various bits of evangelism and whatever else on the platform. So I think that's a more obvious example of something that was intended for evil, but had good outcomes to it. Although I'm not sure that a couple of CU groups makes the entire enterprise of Facebook. It doesn't redeem it as a totality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a sense in which the story of Joseph was the brothers fully meaning evil and the outcome being totally beyond any, positive significance that anybody could imagine. It's like literally the fact that Joseph was going to be killed. You could trace those events through and be like, oh, it literally led to like eternal life and salvation for millions of people.
Yeah.
So there's a real like ultimate form of this redemption narrative, and I've yet to quite see that happen with the internet.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, one does have to contextualize the passage. I think what I mean with it though is just generally the fact that I think Joseph's story is also the closing of the book of Genesis. So it's like the it's not the Messiah, but it's like a figure that in many ways resolves resolution of the noise, makes information of the potential that's generated in Genesis 3 with the fall, where Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, desiring to know good and evil. Again, they want to decide how the binary works. They want to decide what is a one and what is a zero. And then their decision, being one that is evil, corrupts all of humanity. So I think it's just I'm just trying to use it in the sense of total depravity, or I need to understand that term better as well. But it's in the sense of just the deprived nature of the human being. That is also again shown in the brothers betraying, especially Judah, interestingly enough, kind of like Judas, betraying their messianic brother Joseph. And then that turns into their salvation.
So what? No, I know this. This is a bit of a hypothetical, but what would you say to somebody who was of a sort of Amish, like Mennonite persuasion, who would just call the internet evil, and that you should eschew basically all technological innovations? I mean, it's hypothetical because obviously they won't be listening to this. or they shouldn't be. If you're Amish and you're in the audience right now, then I'd be very curious to know what sequence, is this part. Don't they have a year where they're like go and try out the world and see what they think?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if that's you, just turn off the speakers for a second.
I think you're doing a good job. You've only been on the internet for a maximum of a few months, and you've already found Lambda Bible Studies. That's pretty elite.
Yeah. You've taken the shortcut. The actual
Johnny thinks they've probably got it right, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I think that they're taking into their hands what Adam and Eve took into their hands when the serpent tempted them to take the fruit up and eat it. They're trying to define what is good and what is evil themselves, but that's not the power that's given to us. Or we took it for ourselves, but it's also the same thing that's destroying us. And I think when one sees all the time that we as humans by nature, now that we have fallen, are trying to justify ourselves by that what we do and decide in the eyes of God, but nothing can turn back the clock. There's entropy again. Like once the energy has left the system, you can't get it back. Once the change of energy has taken place. And
what if this is something I've wondered many times? What if the internet is our equivalent of like our excuses for going and using the internet are very similar to Lot saying, I'm going to go and live in Sodom. Right? It's not that Lot was wanting to participate in all of the debauchery, but it was a good place for business, and then he suffered the consequences. Like
commerce.
Yeah, perhaps we should make a calculated decision to face the consequences, but withdraw from online activity because, well, for a start, a lot of the stuff that's going on the internet is really dangerous and questionable and debauched. And for a second, we may well get swept up in the coming judgment that will probably result on, in a spiritual level, that something will happen that will be a consequence of the kind of rebellion against God that the internet has seeded.
Yeah. Well, I think internet culture as such is not something that one should just submit to blindly. And I think, yeah, again, if one makes use of the internet in such a way that it serves a higher purpose, I think that that's good. And by higher purpose, I mean a godly purpose. If by higher purposes you mean like false gods or something, then I would not advise that. But if you're like trying to fulfill your vocation in the world, like again, organizing things for your job as well, maybe to some degree, and you use these instruments, that's not so bad. Or forms of literature in the form of like film and I don't know, YouTube maybe, because you get lots of very good essays and the like, and you get Lambda Bible studies on the YouTube. Then I think that's not the end of the world. And you can even read really cool source texts that you can find on the internet at like archive.org or whatever else. And so it's got a lot of potential to give you access and the power to communicate very effectively. That also takes something away from you, namely this kind of like slow and more meditative quality that real physical objects have, and also just the impressiveness of a physical object, like the sensual character of it, which is healthier for the human being, I think. But it is there, and I wouldn't say it's just evil. I think it's more superficial, and it prevents you from becoming a more robust creature. But just because you are lesser doesn't make you evil for using this tool, this very powerful tool. And yeah, and I think, but yeah, like I said, I think like internet culture or something is not that shouldn't be your source of identity. I think there are other sources of identity that generate culture that are much healthier, like for example the Bible and your local congregation.
I'd like to propose a practice that can help the listeners to ensure that the internet remains in its proper place in the hierarchy of their life. A practice which is much more explicitly advised for other things that that one might be tempted to make idols of.
One must do a handstand for 10 minutes before
every time they. No, I was going to say fasting from the internet.
Oh, okay.
Not
that was my second
food, which I mean, additionally to food, I suppose I should say, because I think Jesus says when you fast. We're also encouraged in 1 Corinthians that we should abstain from. So, for example, a married couple might abstain from intimate relations for a period of time. I think anything that is a marker of kind of convenience or pleasure that might rule us, that might take control, money or popularity or whatever. If you're like concerned that it has got out of place in your life, it's a very sensible idea to pick a period of time, a matter of days, 1 day, 2 days, a week, and just completely cold turkey go without. So, I'm not saying, I'm not suggesting, for most people, I don't think you need to live this monk-like ascetic lifestyle where you completely withdraw from the world. But I do think it would be smart to make sure that it's possible for you to control yourself and reevaluate your relationship with the internet. So there's an actual piece of practical advice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another really interesting point Johnny the Great makes is the kind of memory loss that one gets through immediate access to information. If you don't have to internalize the information, like make it a part of yourself, because you can carry it on you in the form of your cell phone or something, smartphone, then you become less, in a sense. Like you lose identity or actuality. Like you're something that has the potential to unfold more, to become of greater definition, of greater power in some ways. But you are not, because you're letting your smartphone be half of you. Which is, I'm guilty of this. That's what, it's just something that I've been thinking about recently, because I could be memorizing a lot more and and just taking more notes on the things that I come into contact with. I've been thinking about journaling a lot because I've been reading Dracula and so on, which I think also helps the memory to and just your thoughts in general to develop and to be digested in an appropriate way. Even though journaling is also something relatively new, I think.
Yeah, and I could Google or even these days like use ChatGPT to discuss. So I suppose I'm wondering, like, what does the Bible say about X, Y, or Z? And I could look up those passages and go and read them, but it doesn't functionally replace all the instances where I just have certain bits of the Bible in my brain ready to go, like without the complex need to read the whole passage and understand the context. And if you've already got the stuff in your brain, it's just useful in a direct, practical way. So yes, I am strongly again endorsing, I guess in this case, memorization of scripture. But the more broad and general point would be, would be freeing yourself from the shackles of internet reliance. That we lose more than we expect when we complete. And I also am kind of holding my hands up as having made these mistakes myself. But we need to recognize that becoming these kind of cyborg beings where half of our function is tied up in electronic devices, when we outsource part of our behavior as humans, we ship we ship certain calculations and processes out of our own brains, and we may still be able to kind of operate on a very functional level, but we also lose part of ourselves, and we become less integrated, holistic beings, and we also become sort of vulnerable in various ways, and just weaker and insipid. So yes, have great caution and care. Apparently, Hello has acquired a KJV that is
Yes.
so small that it requires a magnifying glass to read. Incredible. Well, I don't know if you had any other final thoughts, but I think we've definitely spread a few seeds for thought, and I'd be keen to see in comments if this has sparked any other ideas from people who watch this back. Which itself is as another example of this weird pseudo society. You know, one of the odd things, because I've got this YouTube channel and I run these retreats, and people come along to them who've never met me in person, and I sometimes have this very strange interaction when I first meet somebody on one of these things, where they pick up a conversation with me as if we're old friends, which is nice in its own way. You know, it's it's kind of like having loads of friends who I didn't even know about. But I have to kind of almost run to catch up with where they're at, because they obviously have got used to listening to my voice and hearing my opinions on things, and they know who I am, know various things about me, and I've got no idea who they are. I don't know their name. I don't know what they're interested in. I don't know what denomination or what church background they have. So I think that's an interesting example of this is the what's the fashionable term for it, when you think you have a relationship with somebody and you actually don't, but what I'm very pleased with is that through the Lambda retreats, and I encourage people to do other basket weaving and whatnot, I've been able to actually have face-to-face relationship, as in I have friends who I've met, and I have converted. Maybe I've spoken to them before on Discord or whatever, but there is a kind of reality to human friendships when there can be no asymmetrical. There can be no sort of asymmetry. There can be no pretense. Like, it's back to straightforward, two people in the same room getting along together. So yeah, it's kind of part of a general part of a general, I guess, leaning towards let's move our community into the real world wherever we can. Let's get out of the airport gift shop. let's stop browsing perfume in the duty free, and let's get to that holiday destination, or maybe we were getting on a plane to do something less enjoyable, but let's get somewhere we could roll up our sleeves and do the mission that we were flying out to do. The airports are really important and necessary things, and this YouTube channel and the Discord and whatever are, I think, serving a really important role, and I don't have any qualms about kind of wielding the internet and dipping into it. But yeah, I guess I just encourage anybody listening to this for whom this channel is their main engagement with faith, to look to make that a more direct human experience rather than just being a kind of a piece of their life that lives virtually.
Amen.
Good. Great. Well, I imagine we will revisit this topic, even if just in passing in the future. But I'm glad we got some of those thoughts, not down on paper, as it were, but
On the record.
on the internet. So it's as real as anything, right?
Yeah, it's hyper really.
I'm glad we've made these thoughts hyper real together. I feel like I'm going to be remembering little ideas and clips from this conversation for like several weeks. So thank you very much for that, and yeah, thank you for prepping it and chatting with me.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Good night.